Good morning, everyone. We meet in a place which is an absolute icon. Here you've got a building that was a ruin. I think it was due to be knocked down, and now look at it. Transformation House. That is what the Christian gospel is all about. So I'm glad we're here today, and I think we should be very grateful to Justin and his team for putting on this conference. It is sorely needed. When I started out in evangelism some 60 years ago, I have to say, in university and in the army, things were much more straightforward than they are today. To be sure, human beings were just as self-centered and opinionated as they are still today, but there were no Muslims around. The atheists were not vocal. The vast majority of people had some sort of belief in the personal God of the Jewish and Christian faith. And what's more, most people believed that Jesus was the Son of God, however they understood that term. And so the job of the evangelist was to expose human need, to call on people to return to the God who gave them life and gave his life for them. I like to call it electrifying the fence on which they sat. But it's a very different scene today. Muslims, proud of their religion, crowd our city streets. Atheists are springing up everywhere, encouraged particularly by Richard Dawkins. Many of them, of course, haven't thought their position through. It's just a fashionable way of keeping the challenge of Christianity at arm's length and fitting easily into the skeptical, liberal society all around us. The homosexual lobby, though actually it's small in number, is extremely powerful and very vocal in attacks on Christians. Their cause is popular with politicians and the media who fail to realize that equality is not the same thing as complementarity. And although many eminent scientists are Christians, the prevailing view around the country is that science has ditched Christianity and that intelligent people shouldn't waste their time on so old-fashioned and outdated a faith. Well, now, a climate like that can depress us, but I find it very bracing. I think it's like a gale when you're walking along a seafront. I love being alive today. I love working in Oxford, where full-blooded atheism and full-blooded Christianity are in constant interaction. It is a great time to be alive. But it simply will not do to shut our eyes to what's going on around us and say, I'm just going to preach the old-fashioned gospel. The title of our conference takes us to the heart of today's demands on Christians. We must be prepared to give to everyone an answer. And those words come, as you will know, from 1 Peter 3:15. Peter also faced a hostile intellectual climate, and he gives his readers and us a very helpful series of injunctions. First, it's critical to sanctify the Lord as God, sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart. We must retain that living touch with the Lord, be in constant communication with him, because otherwise we're going to be making no impact at all. And then he urges his readers to be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is within you. Now that's a big ask. Christians should have confident hope, he's saying. They should be unashamed in sharing it, even against, a background of persecution. Christian lives should intrigue other people and cause them to ask questions about what makes Christians so winsome. Christians are called to give a convincing answer to the questions they may be asked, and Peter tells them that they must be ready to do so. In other words, they must have thought about these things and done some preparation. How good are we, I wonder, at coping with questions like, nobody believes in God these days, do they? Did Jesus ever live, or is he just a comfortable myth? How can you believe in God when there's all this suffering around the place? Aren't the Gospels fairy stories written hundreds of years after the event? Those are common questions. We need to be prepared to give a decent answer to questions like these. which often crop up when we're least expecting them. But Peter hadn't finished with his emphasis on the need for what we now call Christian apologetics. We are to do it, he says, with gentleness and respect, keeping our conscience clear, so that when we are maligned, as we certainly shall be if we dare to stick our head up above the parapet, maligned by those who abuse us for what is actually our good conduct in Christ, we want these people to be ashamed of that. And he goes on to point out the cost, the inevitable suffering in some shape or form that will come our way if we speak up for Christ, linking it amazingly with the suffering that Jesus himself had to endure. A very rich little paragraph, that. So unless we're going to be plain disobedient, I don't see how we can avoid tackling the objections to Christian belief and the idea that Christianity is finished, which we increasingly find all around us in the pubs, in the media, in the football dressing room, and increasingly in current legislation. This explaining the reason for our faith, apologetics as it is inelegantly called, has got two sides. The negative side, which sets out to demolish the grounds for unbelief, and the positive side, which sets out the reasons for the Christian faith. Some Christians may think it inappropriate. Surely we depend on faith alone. No, we don't. True faith is self-commitment on evidence, and apologetics presents that evidence. Reason and revelation are friends, not foes. And on the other side, you've got some Christians who seem to think that you can argue people into the kingdom through sheer apologetics, but you can't. Bringing people into the kingdom is God's work, it's not yours and mine. But we can show the strength of the case which challenges them to decide. Apologetics is very important. Without it, many of our youngsters will fall away as soon as they get to university, and we will not be able to win thoughtful undergraduates to Christ at this critical stage in their lives. The media and the universities are hotbeds of anti-Christian influence. In Europe, God has been expressly omitted from the Constitution. No mention of Christianity is made in the account of Europe's formation. Amazing. Here in the UK, Prince Charles wants to be the defender of faiths, not the faith. Christians are getting to lose their jobs if they wear a cross at work or pray with a sick patient on the ward. The BBC now, I think, has a Sikh and a Muslim running popular Christian religious programs. Abortion and divorce are rampant. Same-sex marriage is a probable part of the government's agenda. And in the UK, the majority now do not bother to get married. Islam, with its Sharia law and extremism, is treated with kid gloves by all our politicians. A new dark age may be upon us unless Christians make a stand in the public square, and that's what apologetics is about. So I welcome a day like this. It's not going to answer all our questions, but it'll give us a good start. And there are well-stocked book tables around and DVDs and what have you. Books help you to take things further in your own time. Curiously enough, a day like this is rare. Where in the normal church setup do you hear objections to the faith being intelligently handled? What ammunition is on offer to Christians who are trying to stand up for Christ in a chilly climate? Not much. I was leading a university mission recently and preaching one night on the evidence for the resurrection. The president of the Christian Union, can you believe it, turned to a friend of mine and said, "Evidence? I didn't know there was any evidence for the resurrection. I thought we just had to take it on blind faith." What does that tell you about the failure of his church and the youth club from which he came? Is it any wonder that lots of our youngsters who come from Christian homes and are members of Christian churches fall away as soon as they're exposed to the acids of skepticism amongst friends at work or in college? They have never been helped to give to every man an answer. I've just been writing a little book called Jesus for Skeptics. There's nothing wrong with skepticism. It's simply a Greek word for investigation and consideration. The true skeptic refuses to take a dogmatic position and prefers to keep an open mind until he has examined the evidence. Though, as G.K. Chesterton once quipped, the object of opening the mind, as of opening the mouth, is to close it again on something solid. So when somebody tells me that they're a skeptic, I congratulate them. I set about finding out the area of their skepticism and then seeking to supply a response. In many ways, skepticism is healthy. It means you refuse to be taken for a ride. You refuse to credit anything where the evidence is weak. You are not easily conned. But in other ways, skepticism is unhealthy. After all, you can't doubt a thing until there's something to doubt. You have to believe something before you doubt it. Doubt about God, for example, depends on the prior existence of belief in God. So let's welcome people's expressions of skepticism. Set yourself to help them close their mind on something solid. There's a lot to be said for leaving aside lots of the other objections to Christianity that they're constantly coming up with, and concentrate the person's attention on the very heart of Christianity, that's Jesus Christ himself. You see, Christianity is not an ideology. It's not a myth. It's all based on history, something that actually happened. Someone whose arrival on earth changed BC to AD. Religions such as Buddhism and Confucianism would continue quite happily, even if it could be proved that Buddha and Confucius never lived. It's their teaching that matters. But that is not the case with Christianity, which is not a system of religious rituals and ethical rules. It is essentially good news about a unique historical person who died a mere 30 years or so before the Gospels began to appear. If someone could show that Jesus never lived, Christianity would collapse like a pricked balloon. For it all depends on the conviction that this historical person, this Jesus of Nazareth, shared God's nature as well as our nature. And so you're going to need to do some homework if you want to be able to defend this central Christian belief. You might look into Tacitus and Josephus, first century secular writers, and see what they had to say about Jesus. You might like to work up your own talk to back up your belief that Jesus is divine as well as human. You could point to his unrivaled worldwide influence, nobody to match him, his matchless teaching, his sinless life, his fulfillment of scores and scores of prophecies, hundreds of years later, utterly unparalleled in world history. You could point to his astounding claims, to his amazing miracles, to his sacrificial death, to his glorious resurrection. Each of those points to someone who was more than man. And together, their cumulative evidence is unanswerable. You might do the same with the resurrection, because that is the central Christian conviction backed by massive evidence, and yet people find it so hard to believe. And if you arm yourself in this way, you'll be able to hold your head high in a hostile climate and be able to speak for the central truth of Christianity, which is, of course, Jesus himself. There are experts who can go into details over such things, and we thank God for them. We can't all be experts, but we should all be able to give a reasonable account of the faith that is within us. Islam puts us to shame in this respect. Most Muslims know their way around the Quran better than Christians know their way around the Bible. And practically all of them can engage in a basic and very direct apologetic against the Christian faith, and they do. They will tell you that we worship three gods, that Jesus never died on the cross, and that our Bible text is corrupt. Could you begin to answer those three charges? Well, I hope you could. Anyway, I'm sure that today will greatly help us in giving to every man an answer. Let's make the most of it.